Welcome to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we're about to have a bisexual awakening as we discuss Season 2, Episode 4 of The Last of Us, titled Day 1, written by Craig Mazin and directed by Kate Herron. But before we dive into today's episode, let me tell you what frequency our walkie-talkies are on so you can spy on us more effectively. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on every platform. If you prefer to watch your podcasts, you can watch this over on YouTube or over on Spotify. You can also follow the pod on Instagram at Femme Furious Pod. And if you have any thoughts, feelings, rants about today's episode, you can send me an email over at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. Last but not least, join the Two Femme, Two Furious community. We are growing over there, and it's a really lovely space for us to be together with like-minded femme folks. Over there, you will get Femme and Furious fully loaded bonus episodes. You get Tea Time, which is our online chat, the Suffragette Award, which gives you access to voting privileges for content and more. You will also get a 15% discount on merch and live events, Sunday Brunch, which is a monthly virtual hangout, and the Fast Five, which is a weekly content roundup. Okay, let's jump into this week's Femme Frame, where we dive into key feminist themes, history, cultural context, and more. And this is in fact your spoiler warning for this week's episode. If you have not seen the last episode of The Last of Us, titled Day 1, Episode 4, turn back, go binge it on Max, and then pop over here when you're done. This will be here when you're ready. Here's a synopsis of this week's episode. Dina and Ellie begin their journey through Seattle in pursuit of Abby and the wolves, only to be caught in the middle of a turf war between the wolves and the Seraphites. Ellie and Dina are driven underground into the subways where a horde of infected attack them. Wanting to save Dina's life, Ellie uses herself as a human snack distraction to get her and Dina to safety, ultimately having to reveal to Dina that she is, in fact, immune from being infected. And hey, while we're sharing secrets, I'm pregnant! Well, not me, but Dina is. And now that their secrets are out in the open, they can finally come together and get jiggy with it. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently today as far as like how we structure the episode, because even though this was an episode where like a lot of stuff happened, it still felt to me like a breather episode. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but it was just after like episode 2 where Joel dies, episode 3 where we are going through the process of grief with Ellie and this preparation and like saying goodbye to this character of Joel. There was something about this episode, even though a lot of shit happened in this episode, that just felt really narrative shifting, and it didn't feel as heavy even though a lot of stuff was happening. So we'll just kind of go through all of these things because there's one very specific key theme that I want to talk about today, and it is communication and how men communicate and how women communicate, because this is what I thought was the most fascinating part of the episode. Now, I will also say the episode opens on like the Fedra van and like all of the boy talk that's happening in the Fedra van. And this is the first time in 13 episodes, including all of season 1 and then everything that we've had so far from season 2, that an episode of The Last of Us opened and I was not hooked in. In fact, I was really pulled out of it by the Fedra officer being Josh Peck. Like, my first note is like, is that Josh Peck from Drake and Josh? Because he's in the headgear. So I couldn't really tell, but like between the accent and like his mannerisms and just growing up with him as a child actor from my youth, I literally wrote down, I cannot take this seriously. And I couldn't. It really, really pulled me out of it. And I know he was only in it for a brief moment, but just to have this cold open with him here really didn't work for me. I don't know. And also on top of that, from this story that is shifting from Joel being the central character to Ellie taking on this mantle and the story becoming about Ellie and inevitably Abby, I really, really had a hard time with this opening. It was like this entire scene was a hard pass for me, Jizz boy. But here's the thing. As a woman, and if you're listening, I'm assuming that you're a woman or you're femme-leaning, this locker room talk that is happening in the Fedra van is something that is so abhorrent to me. Like, we as women have been forced to endure a conversation with a man who's doing this thing, right? This performative storytelling in a way that is not authentic to their nature. Because as a woman, and for many of you women listening, you have likely been forced into a conversation where you've had to listen to locker room talk, or you have had a man doing this performative storytelling in front of your face. And this is really consistent in the episode because Isaac ends up doing this later. He's like monologuing, and I think I have that in my notes, and I will go through all of them. But this idea of like men monologuing to get their point across, and in this really big, bold, performative way to get the attention of other men or to see themselves as the alpha in the situation is very different than how women communicate, which is oftentimes much more silently. And this is also really interesting to me because they do this a lot in the episode. There are a lot of glances passed between Ellie and Dina. They are silent communicators. Women do this all the time. We communicate with our eyes, we communicate with our facial expression. This has like been a trend on social media where women will say like, oh, what am I saying with my eyes? And doing like different eye gestures. And other women know what they're doing and men have no idea because we communicate so differently. And this is so fascinating to me because sociologically, like out in society, men will say that women are gossipers and like to talk a lot and they don't like to talk. And it's actually interesting because when we are in these community and safe spaces together, when we are in spaces where we are actually communicating in full, a lot of the communication is silent. And some of that is just because, again, I can't say it enough, Bella Ramsey is a wonderful face actor. But there is something beyond that, that they make Ellie and Dina have these silent conversations, these glances or looks or gestures that pass over their face that is very different from the men that we see in this episode and how they feel that they need these big performative monologues to get the attention and the reverence of the other men around them or the domination over other men around them. So I thought this was really interesting because it happens multiple times over the episode. And this was one of those things, if we're looking at something from the feminine frame, that really stood out to me because I know for myself too, like as a woman, there are so many times when my mom, my sisters, my friends will say something to me and I'll just look at them. I don't have to say anything. They know. You notice the subtle shifts in someone's body language. And I think women do this really well because we are forced to be aware of what men are doing in the world and being able to communicate that with other women in a way that is safe and not overt. Whereas men can just suck up all the air in the room and then, in theory, turn around and say that it's women that do that because we chat and gossip and all of this stuff. The other thing that really took me out is like all of these wolves, right? All of the people that are wolves or that will become the wolves, the WLF, Washington Liberation Front, okay? Just in case you don't remember what wolf is. There was a man in there who, if you've read Throne of Glass, he was Lord Lorcan Logan. He was 7 feet tall. And again, it took me out of it. This whole beginning scene, I really wanted to be so invested because the taking down of Fedra and this idea of what they're talking about in the van, which is like, why do they call them voters? And Isaac, who becomes the leader of the WLF, the Wolves, knows that it's because Fedra becomes this fascistic, authoritarian movement in the apocalypse and has essentially taken their right to vote away. And that's why something like Jackson Hole is so profound, because it's democratic, it's elected, it's civilized in its nature. And then we have this experience of the Fedra and even the wolves and the Seraphites, like these sort of all-encompassing units that are sort of forcing people into submission to be a part of the group or to participate in community with the group. So it's really interesting that we get this beginning scene, because if you go all the way back to season 1 to episode 4 and 5, when we're in Kansas City and Kathleen and her group have taken over and essentially gotten rid of Fedra. And that's what's happening here. The wolves originally start as a unit who are trying to take down this fascistic unit of Fedra. But we get the conversation here with Josh Peck about the Seraphites. Like, I don't know, they were just some religious fanatics that were handing me some pamphlet. And he moves on with the story. He's like, it's not even important. And meanwhile, this becomes the most central thing that's happening in Seattle in present day, is the turf war between the Seraphites and the wolves. And then I have a note here that says Siri plays Savage by Megan Thee Stallion, as we get our introduction to Isaac, who takes 2 grenades, throws them in there, and just kills all of these people in his Fedra unit. So then it cuts to Dina and Ellie, and finally we see them scavenging, because in the game, you are scavenging all the time. Like, anytime you see a work desk, anytime you're in a new space, like, you're taking in new materials all the time. You're trying to scavenge everywhere that you go, and they don't really do this. And in fact, I really have a problem in season 2 with how they have been using their resources. This is something that really doesn't make sense to me. And there was something really gritty about season 1, and I get it because they were on the road, so they're in the same clothes and they're tattered down, and more scraping and scrapping through the world, and that makes sense to me. And I understand that when they're in Jackson, it's civilized, they have resources. But again, like, coming back to the cookies, which I went on a whole rant on last week, but then this episode, it's like, do we really need to use 2 grenades to kill like 8 people or 10 people when there are clearly still hordes of infected in the city? And I want to just say, over on Button Mash, which is a podcast on Ringer, it's a video game podcast, Ben Lindbergh last week was like, why do we need to have a turf war in the apocalypse? Is there nowhere besides Seattle that they have to go? Like, do they have to be having this violent turf war here? And like, even so, if there's 2 groups of people, the wolves and the Seraphites, is Seattle not a big enough city for both of these people? So at present, 755,000 people live in Seattle. Surely, excluding the infected that are there and underground, surely there is enough room in one city, a major city like Seattle, for both of these people. Do they really need to be like pulling out their entrails for each other? I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. Can't we just pick up and move somewhere else? Why? Why is it like this? And why are they not more concerned with their resources in a zombie apocalypse where nothing is getting produced or made? I don't understand. Like, in season 1, one of the things that Marlene talks about is that they're sending Riley to Atlanta because they make weapons or they make artillery over in Atlanta. That was what was happening over there. So I understand that some people are still producing this stuff, but like, think about like Atlanta to Seattle in the apocalypse. There's no gas. We're not producing any of this stuff. Like, I don't understand how we are just so willy-nilly with our resource. Like Isaac lights a gas burner to heat a pan for torture. Surely you do not have enough gas for that. It's impossible in my mind for you to think that you have enough gas to survive the entire apocalypse, to which there is no cure, and we're just going to waste our resources. And then you see Dina and Ellie, like, nipping on some beef jerky. I don't understand how we're in these different zones of resources and how we're using them. It doesn't make any sense to me. But finally, we do end up seeing them scavenge. We see Dina and Ellie going through, like, there's nothing in here, fine. Dina has found a bajillion pregnancy tests, to which she takes them all, okay? And they didn't show it. And in the beginning of the episode, I was like, they don't tell us, and we have to, like, sit with this as, like, game viewers. But I will say that the pace that they're taking versus the stuff that we know in the game is different, but refreshing. And then we get sort of the pride parade. We get Dina and Ellie's pride parade, and I was like, oh, okay, this is the episode where they're going to have sex. There was just all these LGBTQ flags, and it's so sad to me that Dina and Ellie, who were born after the apocalypse started, don't know what the pride flags mean. And again, going back into 2003, when it was around, but it was not the way that it's been centralized today. So just Ellie and Dina moving through this pride part of Seattle. I don't know. Sometimes I really enjoy what The Last of Us does, where it's really subtle and it's holding our hand as an audience as we walk through it, but it's not tugging us along. And this just felt much more overt. And I don't enjoy when the writing of anything, whether that is a book or a movie or TV show, presumes that I am not smart enough to understand what's going on. Anyone who's been watching the show understands what's going on between Dina and Ellie. And this felt almost like they just needed to put pride flags around to make it very clear to people that this was like a gay awakening for these two characters, even though it's not a gay awakening for Ellie, but a sort of bisexual awakening that's happening for Dina. And it just felt performative, perhaps. And if that's not the right word, it just felt then too on the nose for me. I didn't need all of that. And even for them just to be walking through it would have been one thing. I think that would have been maybe a fun nod. But then it's the fact that as Dina and Ellie are looking at these flags, they're like, well, maybe they're all optimists. Like, they don't know what it means. And I thought that was really cute. But then it becomes too overt when it moves into the space where they keep going. And they're like, well, so much for the proud, happy rainbow crowd, happy rainbow town. And I was like, oh, the fact that they even said like proud, we're not going to say it's pride, but we're going to do the sideways thing. I don't know. I get why they did it. I wish they didn't have to. It would have been fine. I get that in 2003, the world was maybe not as queer accepting, but here in 2025, I have to like always pull myself back into the idea that like, oh, we're in a different time period in different circumstances where queer culture is not what it is today. All right. And then going back to season 1, episode 6, where Ellie and Joel are on the horse and they're talking about, you know, what they would want their dream lives to be and stuff like that. And Ellie discloses that she would like to be an astronaut and that her favorite astronaut is Sally fucking Ride. So I love that now we get this callback in season 2 and she's telling Dina like Apollo 1 and Dina's like, what's Apollo 1? She's never learned about it. And so she gets to share this information with her and bring her into sort of her space world. Then I have a note in my hot takes that says, you sure about that? You sure about that? That's what I heard when Dina was saying that. Dina being the one to balance Ellie's impulsiveness is a really nice touch as like a difference in the relationship that she had with Joel, Ellie had with Joel. Then we get the two of them in the music store. And apparently we are not worried about infected or clickers at all in this very overgrown city where we know that if you touch the wrong patch of Earth, that it can awaken infected somewhere else. Anyway, we're not worried about that because Dina just goes in on the drums. She just starts fiddling around on the drums. And I was like, are we not worried about clickers? Like, we're not worried about, hey, like, we're trying to hide from people. Now we're doing something that's like quite noisy. Anyway, again, didn't necessarily work for me, but what did work for me is Ellie on the guitar. Ellie on the guitar playing Take On Me. And again, if we go back to season 1, 80s Means Trouble, playing Take On Me. Well, they are about to be in trouble. And this is lifted from the game, not necessarily in the same spot, but lifted from the game where you're playing Take On Me. You have to play it in the game as Ellie. And I just love this. Bella is so cute singing the song. They could fix the timeline. Bella singing the song could fix the timeline. It could fix everything wrong in the world. It was so adorable. It was so tender. It was so vulnerable that she's having this moment actually with herself and with Joel, this person who's taught her. And my notes actually say, no, shut the fuck up. I love them. And I love how Dina is looking at Ellie. That's the face of a woman falling in love, especially when you see a character like Ellie who is so tough and rough around the edges be so soft and tender in this moment. So I really love this. I loved seeing the tears well up in Dina's eyes as she sees this vulnerability, and Ellie lets her see this vulnerability and this moment that you get when you know that your world has been shifted off its axis for somebody, when you realize in a moment that you are falling in love or that you are in love with somebody. And this moment for Dina, you can see it in her face. And again, these silent conversations that pass between women, something is passing between them here. It's unspoken. It doesn't need to be said out loud. It doesn't need to be performative. And even though there's a literal performance happening, Ellie is playing the guitar, it's not this big spectacle. It's just quiet and it's tender, and her voice is quiet through it. And it's so lovely, and I thought this was just one of my favorite things that has maybe happened on The Last of Us ever. It was just such a lovely nod to Joel and her relationship to Joel and her grief and everything that's been pent up inside of her, and Dina joining in on that and seeing that and witnessing that with her own relationship with Joel, and knowing that Joel has been the one that taught Ellie this, but also seeing this person that you love that is a protector in their own right have this quiet, tender, gentle moment was really, really, really nice. And then we get Isaac, and we get the copper pan, and the torture scene. And my note literally says, what is it with these men and their monologuing? Shut the fuck up. I love Isaac as a character. I think he's one of the most fascinating characters in the video game. I really was like, I'm good off this really big, bold, violent demonstration that we get of him torturing the Seraphites, hanging the wolves, like their guts hanging out. Ew, it's so gross. It's so masculine. It's so violent in its nature. And then we get these undercut moments of quiet, tender, vulnerable, loving with our feminine characters. And it really balances out for the episode. And it's so interesting because the two most violent characters that we will experience along our journey are Abby and Ellie. And even though we haven't seen Abby in a minute, she just had this gruesome attack of a character that we love and care about. And Ellie is going to go on and do her own shit too. And even the look that passes between Dina and Ellie when Dina's like, well, if we come across people who aren't those wolves, if they're not part of those people, Ellie just gives her a look that says, nobody stands between me and this goal, this objective, which, by the way, is exactly what happened to Joel, that your monkey brain takes over and can't help but want to accomplish what it's setting out to do, which in this moment is revenge for Ellie, but in Joel's scenario is protection, but just like, yeah, I'm going to plow down anybody who stands between me and this thing. Really, really interesting. But again, it's the look that passes between them in that moment that you're like, whoa, okay. Doesn't have to be said. Dina just goes, agreed. Nothing is said out loud. Ellie doesn't even say, yeah, I'm going to fucking plow through every single person who stands between me and Abby. She just gives Dina a look, and Dina goes, agreed. So these really quiet moments between women or our feminine characters that don't have to be said out loud, that can just be understood and agreed upon between them, versus the really big, bold declarations of power and dominance with the masculine characters this episode. Really, really, really fascinating. And these small acts of love that pass between Dina and Ellie. Dina, at this point in the episode, knows that she's pregnant. She is forming an us with the baby in her belly. There's an us here. It's me and this baby. And still, her us, or the way that she perceives us as a unit, is her and Ellie in this future that she's envisioning, which we don't get that confession until later. But the fact that Dina lets Ellie go into the tunnel first when they're under attack and the wolves are chasing them, that she lets Ellie go through the tunnel first. She shoves her through, and then she comes in second, even though she's pregnant and really needs to be protected first. Obviously, Ellie doesn't know this, or I'm sure Ellie would have shoved her through first. But this experience of love and tenderness and what it is to sacrifice and what it is to put the person in your us ahead of you. And I really thought that was a special moment between Dina and Ellie. And again, an unspoken one, but there nonetheless. And then I have a note that says, I'm sorry, why are we just, in all capital letters now, using our resources like this in the fucking apocalypse? Why are you flaring? They just take these flares willy-nilly, and then they skedaddle, right? Then this horde of infected come out, and of course these people skedaddle. Meanwhile, it's their flares that are igniting the infected anyway. And this annoys me. If they're this much infected and they even say well, I thought this was all cleared out. Well, clearly it's not. And again, it reminds me of Kathleen and her people who had overtaken Fedra, and Fedra as a fascistic unit, but one that was clearly keeping infected in these different places under control with their resources as a military. And then these revolutionary groups popping up and taking over these towns and cities, and the infected becoming a problem, or a problem later on. And this is true also for Kathleen and her group. And Kathleen is so focused on her revenge against Henry that this problem that's happening underground, which is this horde of infected underground in Kansas City, mimics what's happening here, which is the wolves are so focused on the Seraphites, and the Seraphites are so focused on the wolves, that they're not focused on the actual problem, which is the fucking infected. We have a real deeper problem here, which is more than having to worry about my entrails being cut from my body and strung up, is the fact that one single bite, one wrong move can bring such a large scale problem that is a deeper and irreversible problem, and that we're still focused on fighting each other. To get this horde of infected lifted straight from the game, where they're running through the subways and the subway tunnels. And in the game, it happens a little bit different. So in the game, the infection is not necessarily spread through biting. It's spread through spores. And you'll see that there are these little spores floating around in the game, and they wear gas masks. So at this part in the game, Dina's gas mask cracks, and Ellie gives her hers, and she goes, listen, I'm immune. And she had told Dina this earlier in the game, and Dina like laughs it off as a joke, but really sees that it's serious here because Ellie starts breathing in spores and immediately doesn't have a reaction. So that is how it happens in the game. But here, because the way that they are spreading the infection looks a little bit different, we get this scene going in and out of the subway tunnel, and Ellie is sort of stuck, Dina's stuck, and she puts her arm up and allows herself to get bit for the 4th time in this show and the 2nd time this season. That is fucking wild, by the way. It's way too many times to be getting bit, despite the fact that you're immune. And I want to come back to this moment in a second, but I also want to say the infected don't look infected enough to me. We only had one clicker that we could see. And then here's my thought process, because as the infection continues to take over people, right, it sprouts out of their head because that's where the cordyceps is traveling to, which is why they were going to cut Ellie's brain open. And that's why Joel plows through all these people. So we've seen other infected with like stuff coming out of their face, the mushrooms coming out of their mouth. But for whatever reason, these infected feel more like a Walking Dead infected to me instead of these cordyceps mushroom zombies. And one of the complaints that happened in season 1 was people were like, there wasn't enough infected. And in the game, you are fighting them all the time, but it's not like this. Like, there's no horde like this. Maybe there's a few at a time, but there's a few kind of like every place that you go, and you sort of like take them out and the building is clear or whatever. There's only one scene, which I'm assuming that they will do in the show, that happened way later in game 2 that I was like, I am terrified of this happening right now. This is horrific. There's only one moment like that, but you're constantly fighting and taking out zombies and stuff like that in the show, so in the game, so they are a threat, but it's not like this where there's like swarms and swarms of them like on top of you. And this feels so much more like conventionally zombie to me. And I don't know that I need the show to be doing that, because so much of the show is like the horrors of what it is to be in the apocalypse and the people and how they respond to it and what they're doing with that information and the characters, right? Like, we care about the characters, we care about their story, we care about their journey. So I understand why they did this, because there was so much discourse and people were like, there's not enough zombies, there's not enough mushroom people. Okay, fine, we're adding more in, but you guys might feel differently. But I also don't like a zombie show. Okay, I just like The Last of Us. I don't like a zombie show. I'm not that kind of girl. I just like The Last of Us. I like Pedro Pascal. He's hot, okay? I wanted to watch Pedro. No, the show is really good and the story is really good. And so that's part of what drew me into The Last of Us and part of the cultural revolution that The Last of Us has put out in pop culture, which is why I was so interested in it to begin with. It's a great story, but this was like, I was like, all right, this thing that happens in the game, which is actually a really interesting, fascinating part of the game, and is so rich because Dina actually really discovers that Ellie can't get infected. So it is an important moment in the game, but here it was just like, and there's swarms of infected, and they're not super infected looking. And I'm like, where are all these people coming from? They're like somewhat infected, because this isn't the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. We are nearly 30 years into the apocalypse at this point. I think we are actually 30 years into the apocalypse at this point. Maybe it's a little bit less than that, but like just around there. And so if we've been in the apocalypse for about 30 years, shouldn't most of the infected be more infected looking in Seattle? I don't know. Okay, anyway, I'm sorry. I'm picking a lot of nits this episode, but there were a lot of nits to pick for me in particular. So let's get back to Ellie and Dina. This scene reminded me so much of Ellie and Riley and this sort of one-to-one comp of these girls, women that Ellie has been in love with or had a crush on, and having their life threatened by a mushroom zombie. And what made me think about this was Dina and Ellie running up the escalator. Because in season 1 in episode 7, when Ellie is with Riley in the Left Behind flashback. They're in the mall and they are doing the wonders of the mall and like what it was to be in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. And everyone went to the mall and hung out and girls did girl stuff and they wore thongs. One of the wonders of the mall that Riley shows to Ellie is the escalator. And Ellie and Riley go down the escalator together and only Ellie comes up. And what I love about this is here's the escalator again, Dina and Ellie running up it together. And in this moment where Riley and Ellie are together in the mall, in the Halloween store, and they are attacked by that one infected who was literally left behind at the mall, Ellie can't protect Riley because she does not yet know that she is immune to infection. She's never been bit before. She's never been put in a scenario growing up in Fedra school where she would be encountering an infected. Not like this, at least. So when she gets bit and Riley gets bit, and they're both sitting there being all poetic and shit, holding hands and ready to die together and turn together and be infected together, Ellie doesn't know that she could have protected Riley, and this is part of her survivor skills. But she knows it here with Dina. So as they run up the escalator and then they get caught, right, in the rotating door, she uses her arm to protect Dina because she knows that she's not going to turn and not going to get infected. And just the differences of not being able to protect the person that you love and care about with Riley, being able to protect Dina, and then having this reconciliation between them after the fact, because Ellie just keeps on going. Because in her mind, she's in fight or flight, trying to get away from these infected, trying to get away from the wolves, and just trying to get her and Dina to safety. Doesn't even think to say, like, by the way, I'm not going to turn because I'm not infected. And then she has to share that information with Dina, who's just blatantly watched her get bit. So what I love about this moment between the two of them too is, like, last episode, Gail called Ellie a liar. And she was like, Joel might be the only person that she's honest with. But here, she's honest with Dina. And she even says, I would die for you, but that's not what this is. I would die for you, I would. But that's not what this is. I'm immune. And going back to this, like, I'm immune, I got bit, right? Where she just is getting it off her chest in the ways that she can and sharing it with somebody that is now, we're seeing their unit start to weave together and become an us. And then we get this moment where Dina says, Ellie, I'm pregnant. And they rush together and they fuck. I was actually really surprised. Like, you see her hand going down her pants and I was like, ooh, it's so salacious. Get it, Bella. Good for Bella. Good for Bella, who thought that she was being inconspicuous with her feelings towards Dina, and it was obvious to everybody else. And good for Dina for having her bisexual awakening and having an orgasm in the apocalypse, despite her morning breath and then her beef jerky breath. What is the dental hygiene situation? If we have flares all over the place, but we are not focusing on toothbrushes, toothpaste, what is the dental hygiene situation? How come people's teeth are not rotting out of their mouths? I have questions. I have lots of questions and no answers, and I'm really bothered by the way that we are discussing resources and then we're saying things like, ew, I have morning breath. Do we care about morning breath in the apocalypse, Dina? When you haven't showered either? You've been riding on a horse, you smell, but we care about morning breath. Anyway, we've got enough beef jerky. We've got enough ammo, but we have nothing to brush our teeth with. But I digress. This moment of them rushing together, Ellie, I'm pregnant, and then like coming together and having sex reminded me so much of like the VJ Day photo where the sailor is like tipping the nurse and they're kissing from World War II. This sort of idea of the frenzy of coming together in a moment. And this happens all the time. Like, you see this a lot of times in wartime movies where two characters will just like fall in love because they're literally being bombed on all angles around them and they like rush together and they make out. And I used to be like, that's unrealistic. But honestly, if your life was consistently being threatened by like seraphites or wolves or Fedra or fireflies or mushroom zombies, like maybe perhaps you would just want to fuck it out whenever you could. And I don't condemn them for that. I think it's great. And I think they should be having more sex in the zombie apocalypse. And then we get this lovely conversation, their post-coital conversation between Ellie and Dina, where Ellie says, when you hide the little things, they start to become the big things. And again, these little glances, little looks, little things exchanged between them, but also, what was unspoken, unsaid to us that we know of between Ellie and Joel, that they were little things. I think I said it in episode 1, that this crack becomes a fissure and this fissure becomes a chasm. And now you're standing on opposite sides of somebody that you love and care about, and you're looking at them and you're like, how did we get here with this big open gap of space between us? And that is because when you hide the little things, they start to become big things and they start to overcome you. And what the showrunners, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, love to talk about all the time is when something in the life journey infects us, our anger, our need for revenge, a lie, and this infection that Ellie has with this little thing of knowing that she could have saved humanity, potentially, and her purpose was taken away, becomes this big thing that has sat between her and Joel. It was so big that even though we know that there was something that maybe closed the gap a little bit, it wasn't like they came back together in their community of two, that Ellie has to live with the consequence of what that chasm was between them. And that's also a big thing because there's nobody on the other side anymore. The thing that will give her any semblance of closure is killing Abby. And I love that we get this conversation with Dina and Ellie where she's like, I don't even know if you want these things. Like, I'm envisioning this whole life with us being a baby, and I want this. Like, I don't even know if you want this. And Ellie so sweetly just saying, well, I want it with you. And this idea of, what we are willing to sacrifice and compromise on when we want it with somebody else. And then we get Dina saying that she basically came out as bisexual to her mom, and she was like, I like boys and I like girls. And her mom was like, no, you like boys. And that stuck with her because there was a rejection from her parents, her mom, this person that's supposed to love and care about you and encourage you to be yourself. But again, 2003 world where bisexuality maybe isn't as popular or as normalized as it is today. And so she just sort of shoves that part of herself down until she meets Ellie. And she says to Ellie, like, you're brave. You're just brave for being who you are. And Ellie's like, I'm not brave. I'm just obvious. And again, these very tender moments between our feminine characters where our masculine characters are cutting each other open, talking about jizz, taking copper pans, giving us monologues about French cookware, which, like, no one cares, Isaac, okay? No one cares. And burning people alive, shooting people, killing people, all undercut with these very tender moments of love and love growing and love sewing something together in a person who is grieving. And is this thing that she is cultivating with Dina going to be enough to soothe the sunburn that is her grief of the lost Joel? And then Dina said something that I also thought was interesting, and we're talking about the apocalypse from a feminine framing, right? Which is, I've never been regular. Dina being like, well, I wasn't really sure because my period's never been regular. And just what that has to mean in the apocalypse when you potentially are starving, especially in Jackson, where there's little game and your growing season is very short, probably have had periods of starvation. Okay, I'm not saying that we're like David's camp of cannibals, but I am saying that in the apocalypse where things are not being produced en masse, probably has had periods of starving, probably the stress of living in a world where you are forced to kill people, forced to feel like your life is consistently in danger from other people, from mushrooms, zombies, from all of these outside sources of like the harsh weather of Jackson and all this stuff would create so much dysregulation in your nervous system, in your body, that probably, yeah, she's not ever been regular. And like how many people are regular in this world, and just this idea of what it is to have to experience your period in the apocalypse and having conversations about your period in the apocalypse and what is it to deliver a baby. We've already seen this when we saw Ellie's mom deliver Ellie into the world with like a knife held to her throat so that when she starts to turn, she can kill herself before she infects her baby. And just how gruesome and brutal this world is, but especially for women and for girls who have their periods, like having to watch Ellie in season 1 scavenge for tampons and like putting tampons in her bag because she's a 14-year-old girl and she gets her period, and then coming into Jackson and meeting Maria, who gives her a diva cup where she's like, this is much more resourceful in the zombie apocalypse where it's just one little thing that you have to carry and it's reusable. Good thing in 2003 we had diva cups and that they became a bigger thing and that we could scavenge the shelves for those, because there are still women and girls who have to go through this experience. It's not like it stopped because the apocalypse is happening, but what that actually means. And just this small line that Dina says when she says, I've never been regular, ever in her entire life. For 19 years, she's never experienced a regular period. And I know for some people in this world, that's incredibly true, even in a normal society, although what would we deem normal at this point in time? As somebody who also has a period and has a very regular period, how disconcerting that must be when you can't even be in control of your body or recognize the signs that your body is giving you to tell whether you're pregnant or not. And how much that must just weigh on your psyche and your body and your mental state and your emotional state as you move through this world and try to navigate this world. Just thought that was a really small injection, but big impact. And really worked for me where a lot of the other stuff in this episode was like meh for me. Then having this sort of joke, the deflection of humor, which is Ellie's thing. Ellie likes to lighten the mood with a pun or a joke or something like that. And this mantle has sort of been passed to Dina, but Ellie grabs it back here in this moment and she's like, so we're having a baby. I'm going to be a dad. And it's a joke, but it's also this nod that she is taking over Joel's place. Joel was the surrogate father, and now Ellie will be the surrogate father. And she's like, me, you, and Jesse, like, how's that all gonna work? Like, Jesse is gonna be a part of this thing. And I just want to tell you guys, this is a personal fact about me. I fucking love a throuple. I read a lot of books that have throuple content in it because for whatever reason, I am feral for this kind of story. Like last year in Bridgerton, spoilers for Bridgerton, when we get like a brief moment of thrupleness, I was foaming at the mouth for it. I am absolutely gone for a story that is about a throuple. So this idea of Ellie, Jesse, and Dina having to figure it out together is really interesting to me. Of course, it's very early on in her pregnancy. We're in the zombie apocalypse, and who knows what's going to happen, because this is only day 1, as the story is telling us. First day of whatever is going to be happening in the story in Seattle. So very, very fascinating, but shout out to all the thruples and shout out to the fact that Ellie and her awareness of like me and Dina are in us, but Jesse will also be a part of this us, and this baby will be a part of this us, and the sewing of the us is sewing up, and what that means for her, and seeing her try to move on with the community and take it seriously. Like, I'm gonna be a dad. It's a joke, but it's also quite serious for her to be the surrogate parent for a child when she has had a surrogate parent and it's had the most profound impact on her life. And then we get the ending where they hear through the walkie-talkies where Nora is. They recognize that name. So they start finding their way to pursue Abby, and Ellie starts getting nervous because now Dina is pregnant. And this is a responsibility that Ellie feels as the new protector of the story. She doesn't want to put Dina in harm's way. She also, as somebody who has had her choices taken away from her at every opportunity by Joel and by the Fireflies, this major opportunity gives Dina a choice. And she goes, "It's different now. Will you please just think about it?" She's giving her the choice, but she's like, "I'm not going to stop you if you want to come, but I would prefer, through subtext, that you would stay here and you stay safe and that you and the baby are okay." And Dina goes together and they hold hands and the episode fades out. And I just thought that was really nice that maybe there is a unit loving enough in Dina and in the baby and with Jesse even perhaps, that there is a unit loving enough that persuades Ellie out of this experience. So if we go back to episode 2, where Owen, who cares about Abby, is like, yeah, the best course of action is to get the fuck out of here, is to convince Abby to go home. That this is a lost cause, that we are putting ourselves in harm's way, that she's putting herself in harm's way for nothing. And obviously that doesn't end up being true. Abby ends up completing her objective. But this idea that is there something strong enough to pull the person out of it? And, you know, this question that Gail has posed last episode to Tommy, which is like, some people can't be saved. And it's not a question, it's a statement. But this is the question that the audience is supposed to be asking, which is that true? Is it true that Ellie cannot be saved from this revenge or this experience of hatred that is taking place in her heart to complete something in her story with Joel and her guilt that she has over whatever has or has not happened with Joel? And is the relationship with Dina and the potential of being a family with a baby and a future with Dina strong enough to pull Ellie out of it? So I think that's what we should be looking out for as the season continues. We're halfway through. We've only got 3 episodes left, which is wild and crazy to think about. All right. That's our Femme Frame for this week. Let's crack open our burn book where we look at our superlatives from this past episode. The Bold and Bothered Award goes to a woman whose name I do not know, but who was the face of what becomes the wolves before Isaac takes over. And she's the one that meets Isaac in the beginning of the episode, and then she just holds her hands out after he grenades all of these people in his Fedra unit and goes, "Welcome to the fight." Bold and Bothered. She was not fucking around. She was ready to take out Fedra. The Shiro Award has to go to Ellie playing Take On Me. This was one of my favorite moments in The Last of Us ever, between season 1 and season 2. So tender, so raw, so powerful. I loved it. I loved Bella in this moment. The Femme Fatale Award goes to Ellie attacking and killing the wolf guard. And we finally get to see her training from episode 1 take off. Like, she jumps on top of him and then she stabs him, and just seeing how badass she is. Speak Your Truth trophy. This moment where Ellie says, "A lot of times I wish it wasn't true, but I'm going to wake up tomorrow as me." And then the honorary heartthrob, "Ellie, I'm pregnant." And we do a little finger bang. Okay. I thought it was great. And that is this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening and for tuning in and for being with me on this journey. It's been exactly a month since Femme Furious has launched, and it's been one of the most thrilling journeys of my lifetime. And I thank all of you for listening every episode. It's been so amazing and so heartwarming. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm humbled. I will be back on Thursday with my coverage of the Thunderbolts, the first deep dive that we're doing into the MCU. I'm very excited for it. I love Marvel, so I'm pumped to share my experience with you guys through the movie. And then I will be back on Monday with season 2, episode 5 of The Last of Us. And until then, go together.